Hey everyone, I am TheChosenOneLegend here, as always joined by my co-host.
Hi, I'm Kai, also known as Fascurreyn.
And welcome back to BunchaJokahs, where we're here today to talk about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed Story. We're finally getting there, it's happening.
It's
and
been a little while since it released, but you know,
it has. We had of course we had to beat the game at first. We had the whole direct happening, which was threw a spanner in the works for our plans, but we're here now, and we'll get straight into this because there's a fair bit to unpack here, because we're covering the entire game's story in one discussion. Now, just to get this up front, of course, the obvious stuff. First of all, spoilers for Future Redeemed and every single thing Xenoblade, basically, so you probably knew that already, but keep that in mind. Also, this is just focusing on the story specifically. We have already done a general discussion where we talked about the gameplay and the areas, and even a bit on like characters a bit more. So this is more so for the full plot. But if you missed out on that video, do check it out. It's still up on our channel, BunchaJokahs. So yeah, go give that a watch first. But if you're sticking around and you're ready, Kai, let's dive into this.
Yeah, let's just go straight into it. Let's go for it.
Here we go. So, the game starts off on what we saw, which is of course Shulk and Rex in their cool, sort of, not full-on new designs, but they're midway designs, confronting Alpha, or as we knew at this point, just Alvis. And Zed's there, and it's nothing new from the trailers, but it's the perfect way to start the game on, okay, what the heck is going on here, you know?
Yep. Yeah, it's just like such a big start, especially with the music kicking in as it slowly fades in. To like the scene of the chaos. It's a very cool way of showing it.
Yeah, straight away they start with the sort of Zanza style music, which we're going to be hearing more of later down the line.
Yes.
But speaking of music, they do the full-on Torna thing where they start with like the battle theme, panning over the entire world over in the forest, where we first see Matthew and A fighting together against what they called an origin construct thing.
One of those. You've been playing too much Tears of the Kingdom with constructs.
You're right, Kai. I can't argue with that. But it's just such a great start. It's so Torna-esque. Like, they knew what they were doing, but if it works, why change it, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, of course we've talked about the music already, but that battle theme kicking in as it shows you the entire world is just like great. And then as it goes into that bit at the end where, you know, they're backed into sort of a nice looking like sort of woodland area, they're being followed by an enemy that they're fighting off for the tutorial. It's like, oh, that's literally Torna. Like, that is beat for beat what happens at the beginning of Torna.
Yeah.
So it's very cool to see.
And it just gets straight into the A and Matthew dynamic, which again, we talked about the characters specifically in our last discussion, but just the way that Matt is immediately that, you know, hot-headed one, goes in with the full punch, and A is like, what the heck are you doing? Dial it back, mate. Just dial it back. It's... They immediately show you who these characters are, and one of my favourite dynamics in all of Xenoblade, like, just from the get-go.
Yeah, it's very cool how they do that. I mean, especially with the accent, which we've talked about in the past. And
yeah.
I don't know, it all just meshes together very nicely going into it, like you already know that you're in for a good story based on that first interaction alone.
Yeah, starts off very strong, and we sort of get the sort of idea with Matthew and A that they're looking for city survivors. This is after the city's been attacked, which is interesting, because I almost wondered if, like, that would be a plot point in the game, but I guess it kind of makes sense to have that already have happened, and part of the story as we're going to get to is sort of learning about what went down at the city. We're going to see sort of brief glimpses of it over the story, and I'll save that to when we actually see the full thing, but it's an interesting way of sort of setting up the mystery of, you know, stuff has gone down at the city, but it's all a bit in the air at the moment.
Yeah, because that was one of the points of question was like, we already kind of vaguely knew bits of the Founder's story based on their statues in the main game, as well as other bits of information, you know, like the city collapsing, etc.
Yeah.
But we didn't know how exactly it would all fit together. And even when we saw that first trailer, we didn't know how it would work. So that, you know, immediately sets that tone of like, oh, the city destruction has already happened, and this is before the new city is made, it immediately sets that time zone, which I think is pretty cool, of like, this is what happened between those 2 points.
Yeah.
And then you know from then on out that anything involving the old city, Nae'l, Gondor as he's called, you know, all of that is flashbacks. So part of the story is told through that, but nothing that I feel like should have been in the main story. I think that they allocated what should be flashbacks very well.
Yeah, and it's also interesting how you just start off with just Matthew and A together. It doesn't explain who A is, because of course that was one of the big mysteries of the game, is, here's this character, they look like Alvis kind of, and they've got the core crystal of Ontos, but who are they? And they're like, yeah, we're not going to tell you yet, we're just we're just going to start things off, and they're just there.
They dangle it in front of your face. They're like, oh, you want to know why this character looks like Alvis? We're not going to tell you. Like,
yeah.
They just tease it for like half the game, and it's so cheeky. And I've got to give them credit because, like, obviously if they tried explaining it off the bat, it wouldn't make sense. So, you know, we'll get to it later down the line, obviously. But I think it makes sense why they held off on it. And it's very funny, in a sense, to just, like, have the player be perpetually confused until then. Like, every party involved knows that the player is confused, and I think that's my favourite part of it.
Exactly. And but moving on from sort of Matthew and A's introduction, we then sort of, as they're looking for survivors, we run across Glimmer and Nikol, who are, of course, are members of Agnes and Kevis in this game. You see them fighting immediately, and Glimmer's bloodthirsty. I mean, she's hunting him down.
I thought she'd be kind of nice, but no, like, that personality's all Mithra, you know? It's
yeah. It is interesting that she, you know, of course, everyone sort of thought she looked like Pyra because of the red hair and that she's probably Pyra's kid. But that personality, just from the death glare she gives, that's 100% Mithra.
I do like it, though, in a sense, because you know, I feel like one thing that obviously they couldn't explore and show off too many times before it got old, but I mentioned how in the main game they never really showed off much battling between Agnes and Kevis, even though that's meant to be one of the core components of the world.
Yeah.
We only saw it in very specific cutscenes or at the beginning of the game. And as we'll get onto, you know, right here, we get to see, like, a battle between the Kevis and Agnes. I think that's really good, and I think that Glimmer works as a very good representation of what the soldiers are like. You know, they're just going to fight. And that's what she emphasizes throughout a lot of the story. So I think it's cool how they did bring it back to that, and it's not just crazy new stuff.
Yeah, they sort of brought it. It was very reminiscent of the start of Xenoblade 3's main game. And speaking of that, when Matthew rushes in and just stops them fighting, I mean, that's a classic Guernica Vandham there. I suppose in reverse technically because this is a prequel, but you know, he does the punch. We saw this in the trailer.
Punch,
big, says the old-fashioned scrap and all that. It's and I just love how when he's trying to break them up, he just demolishes them. Like, he just picks up Glimmer from the back of her clothing and then chucks her at Nikol.
I think that did a really good job of setting the scene of just how powerful him and then shortly after A is. Like, you know, these aren't like random people that we're dealing with here who slowly get stronger. Like, no, they're both already badasses. The ones who are growing are Glimmer and Nikol.
Yeah, and this is only added when, you know, the Moebius then show up, and apparently that they have, like, this reputation of, like, Moebius Hunters or whatever they call them. And
is that what they call us?
It's just funny how nonchalant he is all about it. Like, I guess we are. Alright, we're Moebius Hunters. Or as A says, she doesn't recall hunting any Moebius, she just gets drawn into it, because Matthew just rushes into things. But it's, like you say, it immediately shows off both how strong they are, but how nonchalant their dynamic is despite their crazy strength. You know, it's just natural to them, it's a piece of cake.
Absolutely, it's very cool to see, so I like how they just keep setting that up through this chapter. And yeah, like the fight with the Moebius is cool. I will say I was kind of confused with that fight because I looked at their designs and I tried to identify like which Moebius they were. And like their designs don't match the same ones from the ones that you fight in the main game, which I guess in hindsight makes a lot of sense considering they get killed, but like I wish they kept the letters the same as the designs. That was a small gripe. But
yeah,
either way, it was very cool that we got to fight Moebius this early on, and beating them cements just how strong this team is.
Yeah, when A comes up behind one, and it's a shot we saw in the trailer, but just stabs right through the core. And even, I like that, Glimmer isn't immediately on board with you. Like, Nikol is sort of quite a chill guy, he's sort of just rolling with it. But Glimmer actually straight up tries to stop you in the middle of it, and nearly messes things up for Matthew, so she takes a while to come round, which we're going to definitely get more of. Because, I mean, literally the next scene, after they finally defeated the Moebius, she's completely pissed off with him for saving her, because she was waiting for her homecoming. Yeah. She's clearly a full-on, an Agnes zealot, basically. And it's an interesting sort of to see that sort of dynamic turn around, because we see it slightly with Mio and Noah and the gang ready to fight each other right at the beginning. But I don't think we see anyone quite that passionate about the war, in a sense, which it makes sense they would be, it's all they've known.
Yeah, I agree that they celebrate things, of course, but Glimmer was like really bummed out to be taken out of that loop, and everyone in the main cast of the main game kind of got used to it pretty quickly probably because of the Ouroboros stuff that they saw in front of their eyes.
Yeah.
I would imagine maybe that's why, but even still, yeah, like Glimmer takes a very long time to warm up to it all, and considering the world, it makes sense. It's fair enough.
Yeah, it's all she's ever known, so she wants to get back to it, and she does. She does a Lego and runs off. But before we get straight to that bit, we do have a flashback. These are sprinkled out throughout in kind of weird spots almost, but it works. And our first one is where we see Matthew and Nae'l training with Gondor, and you actually get to play the fight, which is kind of cool. I wasn't really expecting that.
Yeah, that's neat.
But it's nice to actually see Gondor as a character, see he's sort of training, and the fact that I found interesting that he's almost known as this like crazy guy for still focusing on Ouroboros power. Everyone else is sort of dealing with the blades and that, but it's almost become something that people consider fanatics, basically, in the rest of the city.
Yeah, like the future is now, old man, kind of stuff. Like, they don't see it as useful yet. As we know, Ouroboros power is what ultimately is like the key to everything. So, it's a very cool thing that you do get to play through that, of course. It's very interesting how, of course, Matthew's arts are based on Gondor's from the main game, the martial artist class. But then I noticed how, like, Gondor from that fight where you go against him, also has those moves as well. It's like, yeah, it makes sense. It's like a family thing. It's been passed down. It almost makes me wonder why Monica Vandham didn't have that kind of moveset, but I'm sure she has her reasons.
I'm still wondering how they ended up Australian, but that's a conversation for another day. But
yeah, that's I think that was poor decision making, is what I'm going to call it.
True, but of course the best part of this cutscene, as cool as fighting Gondor and seeing him, is it's the fact that we learn Nae'l is just shredding it on that keyboard and the piano, even playing Bringer of Chaos Ultimate.
Yeah. Play us Bringer of Chaos Ultimate, please, Nae'l.
That, like...
tomorrow with you! Okay.
That might almost be delving too far into the fan service, but also, just as it's one-off, I like it. Like...
Yeah, it dips its toes into it and doesn't go any further. Because I feel like if it started going super, like, Doki Doki, fourth wall kind of stuff, it would be like... Come on, man, you ruined it. This is really cool. Like, we didn't need to go that far for this series. But the fact that they just mentioned a couple song names, it was a little silly, and I like that. They just made it a little silly and didn't go any further. Yeah.
But once we get past that scene and we found out that Glimmer's run off, then comes the hunt to sort of find her. I say hunt, they're not trying to kill her, that sounded a bit too aggressive. But you know what I mean, they're searching for her. And we sort of don't get too many cutscenes in this section, but I did want to call out one bit where Nikol sort of talks to Matthew about Ouroboros powers, and they kind of, in general, I think this is a good moment to bring up how Ouroboros Powers are really interesting in Future Redeemed, because they're not quite as developed as the base game, where you can fuse with someone. They're not complete yet.
Yeah.
Rather, you just get this mirage of attacks. And I honestly hadn't even considered it, because I was sort of thinking that Future Redeemed would have, the 6 founders, they would fuse in pairs, and Ouroboros would be basically the same as it is in the base game. But no, it's just sort of this fraction of the power they're able to use whilst they're still developing it, which is different than I was expecting.
It is very interesting, like I was saying before, about the time zone that they set this in with the city. And that does also relay to the strength of Ouroboros, where, like, very clearly it's not refined at all. So I like how you go from the beginning where they're not really sure. I mean, there's the big Ouroboros thing at the end of the game, but that doesn't really count. But it shows that, like, at the end of the story, it's only just beginning with a lot of things, and the Ouroboros power developing is one of those things.
Yeah, definitely. But we'll get a bit more into that a little bit.
Credit to Nikol for making that happen. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. We'll definitely get to the Ouroboros powers. They come up a little bit later down the line. But for now, we start to get into the big stuff here, because Glimmer is captured by Shulk. We see he's back. He's looking badass. He's got a metal arm, which is sick. I mean...
Oh, it's looking great, honestly. Like, the design is very sick.
Yeah, and just immediately he feels like Shulk, how he's sort of taking care of Glimmer, how he's able to sort of, he's observant and firm with her, but also still gentle, because, he's Shulk. He's not an aggressive person, naturally. They, of course, having Adam Howden back helps, but it just immediately is great seeing him in this way where he's clearly Shulk, but he's also matured, and not that Shulk wasn't an adult before, but you can tell the difference, even in subtle ways, which I really like about him.
Yeah, I mean, it's as we said in the previous video, he's very much got that Dunbound vibe about him now, and I think that was a very good move.
Absolutely.
And they do show it here, where Glimmer's like, oh, I had Ouroboros power, what was that? And then just, boom, captured, like, done. These Liberators are pretty strong, so, yeah, very cool stuff. Also
here, I'll mention we meet Panacea, who's quite clearly the child of Sharla and Rhine, which is, I mean, it makes sense that she'd be there. It's kind of, I quite liked her character. We didn't really see much of her, I feel, but it's kind of nice to have that little bit of a legacy, even if throughout the entire game they do play it a bit coy with the references. Like, they're not going to name her parents by name for some reason. Like, you can do it, game, but we get the idea.
They were very strangely particular about that.
Yeah.
And I think it was probably just to, like, I don't know, I think they just liked teasing again. They just liked being a little silly with it, and that's fair enough. Because we knew what they were talking about.
Yeah.
I think that's it, is that, like, they don't... Maybe they feel like they don't want to be too on the nose of just saying the names outright, It's kind of a situation of, like, we know what we're talking about, you know what we're talking about, let's just connect the dots in our heads. I think it's cool.
Yeah. And then, now, this is sort of when we all come together, because Glimmer runs off again. Notice a bit of a returning pattern here.
Yeah.
But she ends up trying to contact the Moebius, but that doesn't go well. He shows up with 2 Phoroneses, lays down the attack, and this is where we get the entire gang together. And who shows up but big boy Chad Rex? I mean...
Let's show him a thing or flee. Oh, it's brilliant. It's so good.
I almost wish that line wasn't in the trailer, because hearing it for the first time I would have just freaked out, but I can see why they did it. It's just such a great moment. Using the 2 Aegis swords and the fact he can combine them into one. Rex is back. I mean...
it's just great, because, like, obviously Rex, not everyone's favourite character from Xenoblade 2, but I think one of the main arguments I made from then is, obviously Rex isn't, like, a great, amazing, perfect character person. He's very clearly just, like, a kid. Like, in that, But then in this, he's definitely not a kid anymore, let me tell you that right now. Like, he's definitely not.
Even, of course, there's the
fact.
So
I like how, we're not just seeing like Kid Rex. This is a Rex who knows what he's doing now.
Yeah.
On top of the determination he has. So, like, it's just a great version of him.
Yeah, he's got, like, that optimistic confidence that young Rex has, but in a way that it's not overly optimistic, because he knows what he can do, and he can pull it off damn well. I mean, nothing's a threat to him really.
He's very measured now.
Yeah, he's still got that sort of same outlook, and we'll see a bit more of that later on, but in a more subdued way. And I know there's some controversy about changing the voice actor. Who knows if the original wanted to come back or whatever the deal was, but I think
after all the hate he got, I can't blame him for not wanting to come back if he chose.
But it also might just have been, maybe it wasn't in his vocal range to do a big gruff Rex voice, but whatever it was, the new guy does it great. He doesn't sound exactly like Rex, but he's a lot older, and he still feels like Rex when he gets going, which is, the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get to we sort of take a break in the middle of this, because again, weirdly timed flashbacks for Nae'l, but this one we sort of get a little look on Nae'l and Matthew talking about the city, and how there's sort of been a 15-year peace from the Moebius. And this is sort of where we sort of get into Nae'l's character a bit more, how she kind of likes things peaceful and just wants to leave well enough alone, basically. Let the Moebius do their thing. Whereas Matthew's like, we can't let that happen. I find it interesting how they it's quite clever how they sort of sow these seeds of Nae'l's sort of philosophy early on, in the way that, is understandable, and you can see where she's coming from. And then when turns out, later on, she comes up as Alpha, you can see why she ends up that way, why she ends up joining him. It's they sort of slowly tease it up in a way, because this is a short game, really. They don't have a lot of time to really delve into characters too much. But they use the time they have well to sort of set that up with these flashbacks, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think they set Nae'l's character up very well in these flashbacks, where, like you say, they give her a philosophy that at start doesn't sound that bad. She just wants peace. She's like, why should we bother fighting when all it brings is risk?
Yeah.
But then as that slowly gets more extreme, as prompted by things later down the line in the story, then it becomes sort of the villainous ideal that Moebius has. And it's interesting how it's not just her being crazy, it's just a slippery slope into an idea that ends up being unhealthy but doesn't sound too bad at first. It's a very, real kind of thing that can happen. Except in real life, people generally aren't consumed by the soul of the omnipotent conduit. But outside of that, the thought process makes sense, and I think that really, immediately, like you say, it sets up her character well.
Yeah, Xenoblade's always been good at having villains that aren't just black and white. And I'm not even sure I'd really call Nae'l the villain as such in this, but they always have that sort of.
No, yeah.
You can see where they're coming from, no matter how much of a villain they are, and that's no different here. But let's. Of course, once this flashback's over, we get the badass moment where Weight of Life comes back, and Shulk, Rex, and Matthew all team up to just take down the two Feroniuses and the Moebius, and God, it's badass!
This might be one of the highlights of Future Redeemed Total. I mean, of course, there's the ending and gem crafting, but outside of those two things, this is probably up there as just one of the best scenes. You've got Weight of Life playing, like you say. All three of them attacking the Moebius at once is amazing.
Yeah.
Just that one little clip of it, you know what I'm talking about, where it cuts between them all.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just amazing. It's so cool.
Yeah, they knew what they were doing. This is absolutely a bit of fan service, but done well, because it's just badass. And I even want to give a Loki shout out here, because of course, Shulk, Rex and that are all pretty good here, but somehow Panacea does a piercing scream when she fights. It's kind of badass too, so that kind of took me off guard the first time.
Credit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But after that's sort of done, we get to see a different side of Rex, which is interesting, because he's kind of pissed with Glimmer. And understandably so, after she ran off for 4 consecutive times in a row. But I was not expecting to see him immediately recognise, this is probably my daughter, and then go full-on angry parent mode. But it's fascinating that they start us off with this very different side of Rex, whilst also being, again, understandable for his character.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like we were saying earlier, where it's still him, but, he's very clearly grown up now, and I like that they put this here because it shows you that, it confirms to you yeah, he's grown. Like, it's still him, but he's responsible now. So, yeah, good inclusion.
It's basically just a parent not knowing what to do with a problem child as well, really, is the situation, because he
Pretty
talks,
much.
Yeah, he talks about it afterwards with Linka, who of course is here as Zeke and Pandoria's daughter, presumably, that's a nice addition. But
yes,
he has that sort of moment with her where he's like, "Was that? Yeah, I know I was in the wrong there. Came out a bit too strong." But it's sort of interesting that him reflecting on that, and then we contrast that with we get one of my favourite scenes in the entire game, to be honest, where Shulk first bonds with Nikol over like their love of mechanics. And
it's really
fixing
cool.
his arm, and Riku's in the background because of course he is.
It is very funny. It's like look, they're bonding, and like it's over machines too, which is Shulk's whole thing.
Yeah.
Cool. What is Riku doing? He just comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's great, but
he doesn't even say anything.
No. He says a little bit there. He sort of adds that he's the one who worked on Shulk's arm a bit, but it's more so.
They don't introduce him, you know.
No,
he's just
not
chilling.
We're going to get a little bit of the idea of Riku a bit later, but even then, not much. But just a nice sort of wholesome scene with their sort of seeing Shulk as a dad, and even after that, we get a little bit with Glimmer and Nikol, seeing a bit of a heart-to-heart with them, which is nice that they. Because I feel like Glimmer and Nikol almost go under the radar a bit in this game at times. Because, you've got your fan service characters, Shulk and Rex back, your past ones, and then you've got the big new ones, Matthew and A. But it's nice that they still find these little moments between them and their dynamic, where you sort of see them... When Nikol helps Glimmer feel more comfortable with all this changing, by giving his perspective on things. It's kind of a nice little brief moment of calm after the storm.
It is nice, it's... one of the biggest strengths of Xenoblade 3 was all of its character interactions through the main story in place of heart-to-hearts, and how they, just let all the characters develop and interact with each other. It was such a good part, and it's good that they have basically brought it back here. So of course that's one of the places we see it. So it's nice that they fleshed out those two characters with that.
Yeah, and we make our way back to the Liberators base, which is, of course, Colony 9. We gave more of our thoughts about that in our past discussion. Great to see it back, though. But, and also, I mean, the man Dillon shows up, so...
Dillon!
Best part of the game, really.
Okay.
But it's cool seeing them have this sort of setup where... to be honest, I still don't know 100% what the Liberators deal is. And I might as well bring this up now. I know we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves, but later on, we don't really get an answer, except one final bit when you talk to Linka, I think it is, when you finish her quest, where she mentions that they were sort of brought here separately from the cycle, and they don't know why other than fate. And that's really all it says.
Yeah.
That's really how we get, but we don't know if the Liberators age, or if they do age, but it's slowly... Like, it's all very vague and in the air, and I'm on two minds about that kind of thing, because on the one hand, it doesn't really answer any questions, but also, it's kind of fun to speculate, and it still tells the story it needs to, but I don't know, what are you thinking about that sort of vagueness about the Liberators, Kai?
Very similarly, it's kind of like, come on, you could have explained it, but at the same time, even if they did explain it, I don't... in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it would have changed much.
No.
And I think that's the thing to remember is while, lots of people, including myself, really want to know those details so that we have the full picture, ultimately, whether they age slowly or how they specifically got brought here isn't important to everything else that's going on.
No.
All you need to know is they are here, and they were brought here specially, and that's it. But it would have been nice if we got something somewhere, maybe if they... I mean, they're not going to bring out a Future Redeemed art book, but, if they did that kind of thing, it would be cool.
I mean, at the very least, we know that the granddaughter of the curry guy was important enough to the world to be brought over, and that's all that matters, so...
Oh, I love that.
Clearly, they were doing something right. But,
I mean, of course, we've talked a lot about Colony 9 in the other video we did. But, yeah, it's just nice to be back here. Like like we said, it feels great, and I like how they take a bit of time to spend the story there. You know, that is your base point almost, kind of like Oresco was, I suppose.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's cool. How that's where they return to. Not much else to say about it, really. It's just nice.
It sort of tones down for a little bit, but we do get another nice bit of. I just like any moment in this game where Shulk and Rex are just having dad talk. It's a really interesting lens to see
all of those
through.
Cutscenes.
Yeah, and there's a really nice heart-to-heart with Shulk and Rex here, where Rex sort of asks Shulk for advice, and he's like, maybe, you know, it's not going to be easy, maybe she'll come to you. Also get a Gramps name drop, and the cheeky Titan's foot in there, so it's all in all like a really nice scene between them two. It's because, I mean, we haven't seen Shulk and Rex interact outside of that brief, probably non-canon bit from the Xenoblade 2 DLC, you know, so
yeah,
it's kind of nice to see them properly in a full story setting get to have that dynamic. But
it's a very good point, actually. I suppose it's not impossible that that's non-canon. Like, in my head, I'd written it off as non-canon as soon as it released, but, like, I guess genuinely, I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. Shulk and Rex are familiar with each other, but we don't even know if that's just from them fighting the Liberators, or if it's from them being in contact from the other worlds. We know the other worlds had contact with each other briefly, so or maybe they did meet with the Nopon Archshade. Who knows?
For my own peace of mind, I'm going to say that's still non-canon.
Probably not, especially
I can't disprove it if someone says it is.
Yeah, I think especially with like Elmer there and that, it's. But who knows? Then again,
yeah.
Not that we don't get some X things later on, but yeah, we'll get to that.
Let's just carry on the main stuff for now.
Yes,
We've got so much to get through.
Another flashback. We do get a little bit of the Nae'l flashback again, where we see just the worst. Where like they sent like some people to start a new city, and they're just all dead from I think it's a Keves colony killing them, and this sort of again building on Nae'l. What brings her to the point of joining with Alpha is, she's understandably, mad about this, and the fact that she can only see the Keves and Agnes as savages, even though Matthew sees the perspective of it's not their fault, it's still they know. Mm-hmm. I can see when that happens to you, you're like, what is the point to a certain extent? And it's sort of seeing the beginning of that downturn for Nae'l is very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very clear catalyst of how all of this has turned out, and like you say, it's kind of understandable when you see all of that destruction. You think, like, there's clearly no point to fighting. Let's just stay inside. And one thing that I can't remember if I mentioned in the other video is I like how that part of Nae'l's character carries through her bloodline to the main game. You know, the Doyle line.
Yeah.
In the main game, they are all very clearly like against what the Lost Numbers do. So I think that's really cool how it carries on.
Yeah, definitely sort of continues through the main game. It's always interesting how there are so many hints to what Future Redeemed would be just in the background elements of the city, which is neat. But then sort of we find out that Nae'l they have a lead on Nae'l, so they all go down to sort of find out where. We head over to Ragroll Lake, which is nice to see again. And then, finally, they're like, here you go. Have your Alpha, have your A-Law. And Shulk and Rex talk to A, and we get a little bit of details about how they, I believe it's they, broke off from Ontos, or from Alpha, and how we sort of learn that Origin was built around Ontos's core when Shulk found it in his world, and that sort of the whole thing with Alpha is that Alpha believes that everything here is obsolete, and Alpha wants to create a whole new world, which is kind of, I guess that's kind of what Alvis did before, but obviously with less of an evil undertone. And what do you think about all this sort of, it drops a lot at you at once, like there's a lot to take in.
So much at once. Yeah, it's hard to unpack just because of how much they give you. But it's cool nonetheless. It's kind of interesting that is Alpha's motive, and that's what we learn here.
Yeah.
It's not far off of what we predicted of Alpha is just acting on the orders that he'd been given previously, and he almost kind of misinterpreted them. It's super curious. But it makes a really interesting dynamic overall, because you've got Moebius who want to keep this current world as it is.
Yeah.
And then Alpha wants to do the opposite of getting rid of this world and anyone who belongs in this world and only take the new people, the city people out of it. So it's interesting how you've got those two sides, and then you've got, your Liberators in the middle who are like, no, we don't want to, we do want to destroy this world.
Yeah.
But we want to destroy it in the sense that we're just going to put everyone back into their own worlds. It's such an interesting overlap of three different sides, and I always like when it does that rather than just having a good guys versus bad guys. It's like, no, there's two different bad guys who are also against each other, but against you, and it's a whole thing. I like it.
Yeah, it's really interesting how we sort of, we also learn that that's why they're not fighting Zed and the Moebius. They have a lot of a temporary ceasefire, which Shulk sort of mentions earlier, because Alpha's the bigger threat. But I do kind of, it's a lot, but it all sort of, once you think it through, it all kind of, it makes sense of things. A lot of the sort of the wider plot begins to make sense here, and how Alpha isn't Alvis, but is kind of like Alvis in the sense of that they're the consciousness, with sort of the conscience, which wasn't there before, but was in Xenoblade 1's world because Alvis carried Klaus's regrets, I believe, was how they sort of explained that. But this Alpha is devoid of that. It's just a completely new entity, just a machine, and it's just seeing all the things like the full Trinity processor stuff being brought into 3, because we didn't really get any of that much in 2. Sorry, in the base game 3 even, sorry. So seeing that in Future Redeemed is kind of, it's neat that we're getting into that wider Klaus lore stuff a little bit.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's very cool, and it's interesting how Klaus, of course, isn't in this, obviously. You get flashbacks and mentions, but Klaus himself doesn't appear because Klaus is already done in both games. We already know that. But it's very cool to see how to close out the trilogy, the Klaus saga. This isn't about him, it's about what his legacy has caused up to this point.
Yeah.
The main thing being Alpha.
Yeah.
It's super interesting.
And then that's, of course, when Alpha Nae'l fusion shows up. We sort of learn that, of course, that's why Nae'l joined Alpha, was because it sort of carries the same idea of, we don't need any of this, we can leave these fighting soldiers behind that are just, chaos on this earth. And I just love how Matthew at the start is like, hey, Nae'l, what's up, mate? He just doesn't get it.
You're right, oh, what's with the get up, mate?
Yeah.
You going to the party or something? You got fancy Halloween or something?
It's so good how he's just so oblivious, but it clicks. They fight, and then N shows up just to add further chaos, and just seeing N and Alpha fight, that whole bit where the water sprays up behind them. There's some really cool shots in that, but it adds, like you say, that war, that 3 different factions comes to a head here, and it's badass.
Yeah, it's just really good all around stuff. That whole fight is cool, and how everything does just get explained to you. It's so chaotic just with all of that. I was saying throughout the entire thing, I've just got to go watch a Luxin video. This isn't going to happen right now. There's too much chaos. I didn't end up watching a Luxin video. I just sort of slowly thought about it that evening.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's cool that they do give it all to you, and like we said before, it's cool how they don't give it all to you right at the very beginning. They let you think about it for a little bit and work it out, and then they just give you all of that information halfway through so that you know what you're fighting for the second half of the game.
Yeah.
And the same thing, interestingly enough, applies to Matthew, where Matthew just didn't know what the deal with A was until this point, because he never bothered to ask like a dumbass.
Yeah.
He didn't know where Nae'l had gone either. He didn't know that Nae'l was evil, or what the deal was with Alpha. And Rex and Shulk obviously knew some stuff, but hadn't told him. So it's kind of cool how they managed to keep it as the player and the main protagonist to know about the same amount. In terms of what's next.
Because after this bit where we sort of, Matthew sees who N is as well, sees N's true identity, and sort of that adds another layer to sort of his dynamic of how does he feel about fighting Moebius in general, which goes to places a little bit later. But then after sort of Alpha backs off and to Origin, where we see Origin again, that's when we get sort of Shulk and Rex are like, okay, we'll bring you up to speed now. And we get like these little flashbacks off of Xenoblade 1 and 2, which is just nice to see. It's just nice to see those little clips and see them all to get brought together with Shulk and Rex explaining it. It's just nostalgia, really, is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I think it was also possibly put there on the off chance that someone is playing this before playing those games.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing? Like, don't play this before playing Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3.
Exactly.
That's like that's probably the only real downside to Future Redeemed is that it requires you to play 3 other games to know what's going on, but I guess this does something for those players.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's cool that they do bring it up to speed, and, of course, having to see the cutscenes is just nice.
Yeah, and then we get sort of where our goal is. They're all united in, we're going to go to Prison Island, to go to Origin, and take down Alpha, basically, is the gist of it, and hopefully free Nae'l.
Yeah.
But we do sort of get a little bit of a side quest before that, particularly one with Nikol and Glimmer, where we sort of see them unlocking the Ouroboros power. And we sort of talked a bit about this earlier, so I won't delve too much, but it's that sort of concept that it's still evolving. They don't quite know how Ouroboros powers work fully yet, or how to unlock the full power. Yeah. But it's cool to see like the Ouroboros stone given to them by Nia, which Rex mentions, and how they sort of are slowly, we see them make an advancement with it, and we see that by an Agnes and Kevis soldier together, they start to unlock a bit of the power that's going to become for the main cast in the main game. So it's cool to see that develop and sort of give a tease of that.
Yeah, it's like we said before, isn't it? Like, it's just cool to see that this is the start of that growth.
Yeah.
And then them beating Shulk and Rex is funny. It's just like, Shulk and Rex are old now, and these are the new kids on the block, so yeah, sure, whatever.
Looks like the student finally surpassed the teacher,
Dixon!
But
it's fine. We said we were going to have spoilers for the whole series. We're allowed to talk about these things.
Oh, yeah. It's safe. This is a spoiler-safe zone. But,
yeah.
No,
the opposite.
Oh, that's true, yeah. Spoilers are welcome here, I suppose, is what I meant by that. But
yeah. Oh, of course, yeah.
But Rex, we get like another... Rex and Glimmer get their sort of heart-to-heart, like Shulk and Nikol got earlier. And all I'll say about this scene is, it's nice, but when Rex was talking about smiling, it's such a Rex moment, and it's nice as well, but I hoped he was going to quote the Salvager Code. I really thought he was going to, and he didn't, and I'm disappointed, but it's still a nice scene.
He should have. I mean, like we've said, it's kind of similar to the main game, but Xenoblade 1 got a lot of love in Xenoblade 3, and Xenoblade 2 did as well, but kind of felt less so in a lot of ways, such as in area depth. And it kind of carries over here as like, we got gem crafting from Xenoblade 1 as a whole thing. There should have been a quest dedicated to, there was a whole like Cloud Sea quest.
Yeah.
We should have instead got a Salvager's Code quest. Like,
that would have been amazing.
On,
yeah.
Give us number 5. Like, they should have.
If only, we can dream. But still a nice moment between them. And there's not too much story as we sort of head up towards Prison Island, but I do want to mention 2 things of Matthew. First of all, the fact that he actually oversleeps for the night and they set up the joke, it's perfect.
It's so simple and dumb. It's just like, okay.
But it's so Matthew, so it's it's a great moment. And also the fact we teased earlier where when they get to the Black Mountains, which is an awesome area, by the way, one of the best snow areas. It's very cool. But the fact that he just didn't know who A was because he never thought to ask, that's literally it.
Yeah.
But
best reasoning.
Yeah, because it also kind of has like a story thing as well, where like now he's a bit unsure about A. Understandably, he doesn't know. This is all a lot for him. When he's really just in this to save Nae'l. He even says earlier he doesn't care too much about the whole state of the world. He'll leave that to Shulk and Rex. But of course, he wouldn't even think to ask who A was. He's like, yeah, they're probably just from the city. Let's assume that.
Yeah.
But
it's a very interesting one that they throw in there. I feel like they throw it in almost too late for it to be developed, unfortunately. Yeah. But again, this is a short story, not much you can do, so it's whatever. And I guess, it's fine.
Speaking of throwing things in there, partway up we do get a little look that Riku's holding on to Lucky 7 still, and if we if you then after that go and talk to Riku, you find out that he sort of reveals that his master pawn, who was teased in the base game, is in fact Melia, and that he is the kid of one of her travelling companions who people were sort of up in the air on whether it's Ricky or whether it's Kino, but still, that's like one question answered about Riku out of the 1,000 we have left, but it's still nice to hear.
Yeah, I mean, people kind of figured out that, like, Riku was the 7th founder, and he had, you know, this thing with Melia where they both made Lucky 7, so...
Yeah.
You know, not everyone, a lot of people kind of figured that out slowly, but I'm glad that, of course, they did basically confirm all of that here, and then adding in the whole thing of being Ricky or Kino's son is also very nice, because then it's like, oh, everyone from the game gets representation in a character. It's very cool.
But I will look forward to just until we get the next Xenoblade game. Every other day there will be someone posting about what is the deal with Riku. It's just the main question, I think, that is lingering from all of Xenoblade now. But
it really is.
I kind of love it in that way. I'm almost glad they didn't answer it fully.
Yeah.
But then when we actually progress the story here and you get to Prison Island, you just get a big badass fight with N, and it just kind of gives me vibes of like the Malos fight in Torna, where like they're all fighting at him from different angles and he's fending them all off. It's really great choreography.
Yeah.
And little bits like how Shulk protects Nikol, and Rex and Glimmer do like the same attack he does with Pyra at the start of that game. It's just such a cool moment between them, just a cool action sequence basically.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, of course, there aren't many opportunities to show a lot of that fighting in this with how few, you know, battle scenes there are with it being a short game, but they whenever they had the opportunity, they took it, and this was their best opportunity, so, yeah, it was very cool to see all the different moves they pulled off here, definitely. And then just also, like, I know I'm maybe skipping ahead a slight bit, but where Matthew just punches him.
Yeah!
Yeah, that's your weapon. That's your weapon, man. Go for it. Do it.
Might as well, yeah. He can throw a punch, that's for sure. And N just takes it. Like, yeah, I deserve it. But
yeah, it's so cool.
But I guess sort of what that scene ties to is we get like a big flashback where we actually see what happens at the city. We sort of get the full scene where Gondor, you know, shows up and N shows up and confronts Gondor, where we see Alpha possessing Nae'l, sort of trying to bring the citizens of the city into that creepy circle that looks like some sort of cult. It's terrifying, but
yeah.
That entire sequence is just really neat. We sort of gathered the gist of it, but getting to see the full sequence play out, and especially when you like even just a little glimpse of M we see afterwards to tie it back to the main game, and she shows up afterwards. It's just great to sort of get that answers for real.
Yeah, it's nice that they just paint the full picture just to be very clear about it all, and it's very jarring how you play as Nae'l during that, because like she's very clearly not the good guy here. Like she's already, you know, being controlled at this point, and it's like, I don't really, I'm not cheering for either of these people, really, but sure. And it was at that exact point where I was like, it feels like Nae'l should have been a playable character. They made her a whole thing here to play as her.
It is weird.
You know, cue later on where she does become playable in post-game, weirdly.
Kind of.
You know, I'm cool with it. Kind of, as a hero. Yeah, it's a very jarring sequence there, and I remember spending that whole thing being like, let me look around, because they designed like a whole city area for this, and there's not really too much to gather from it, but it's cool that they made it nonetheless.
Yeah, and I just really like seeing that moment between Gondor and N. Like, it's just cool seeing them interact and seeing he's sort of Gondor's realization about what's happened to his dad, and I almost wish we saw more of Gondor. I think there wasn't really time for it in the story we were telling, but what we do get of him is really great. And I like that at the end. He like, I'm not even sure what was he doing. Was he trying to? Was when he jumps to Nae'l? Was that move that freed A from Alpha? I'm guessing with the Ouroboros powers. Like, I'm not sure.
Good point. I was kind of thinking he was just sacrificing himself, obviously, to save Nae'l. That's why he jumped in the way of it.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming his Ouroboros power or like whatever that power was he unleashed, saved anyone that was in the city, like in some form from the explosions. You know, that's how the city survivors have ended up scattered. That's all I can really guess. But yeah, it is a bit vague, and I didn't even think about the fact that could be how A came to exist. That'd be kind of interesting if it was. I need to brush
Went
up on
out like a badass at the very least. But after that, after that, things just get crazy because they get sucked into Origin, and okay, suddenly we're in the real world, just a housing estate, and Christ,
we're in like Idaho or something. It's like, what is going on? And then you look over the edge. That looks like New LA. Just because it's a city, it's the only modern city in a.
I mean, and you see the beanstalk, and it's.
But that would be crazy because this isn't like a Xenoblade X series, so that would be crazy if Xenoblade X got referenced. Yeah. But
then it's just I love that this game, like I mentioned earlier, 3 keeps it relatively tame in the regards to like the Klaus and the Rider stuff. So the fact that this game has that moment, like when you first see the planets in Xenoblade 1 and the space station, or in Xenoblade 2 when you first get the flashback to Klaus in the beginning of Chapter 10, it's cool to see Xenoblade 3 get that moment in Future Redeemed, where you're just like, what is happening here? This is mental. And it's just neat. Yeah, it just throws you for a loop.
I think my favourite part of that all is that the characters got to actually see it themselves too. It wasn't just like the player, I guess. Like Shulk and Rex were like, so this was Klaus's old world. And it's kind of cool to see them get closure.
It is. And we then sort of confront Nae'l at the piano. And I mean, let's be real here. Before we get to that, everyone here was just paying attention to the radio that was going on, the damn radio, which is named. I don't have it all listed out. I don't remember or know all the stuff, but it's name dropping characters from stuff like Xenogears and Xenosaga, I think, and Xenoblade X. It's like just name dropping all these sorts of weird previous Xenoblade or Xeno stuff, not even Xenoblade, and I don't know enough to make sense of it, but hot damn.
Yeah, it's just amazing. Like the fact that they tie in both X and like Gears and Saga as well. Like the fact that they just bring all that in the end is like, we didn't think anything would top all the crazy stuff happening at the end of the first 2 games, especially since Xenoblade 3 didn't really do it. And then they just did it here. Like everything about that last sequence, it was incredible, and it was just very cool to see them do that because. Obviously, it doesn't have any impact on much else, and like it wasn't like they had to suffer any sort of consequences as a result of mentioning them. It's quite literally the end of the final game of the trilogy, but it's cool that they did it. It doesn't even feel like it was an unnecessary reference either. They made it fit, so respect.
Yeah, it's definitely nice to hear those sort of shout-outs, even if I can't comprehend anything from Xenogears and Saga. Maybe one day they'll release them on the Switch or something, but I like that it's there. And if anyone was able to pay attention to what Nae'l was saying in the midst of that, which a few people might have been, this is sort of like the culmination where we see her, this is paradise to her, like this is the world she wants. But I love how that sort of, it ties it in with like the whole Klaus saga, when A's like, yeah, this is the world you want, but do you know what happened to that world? And then the storm comes and we see it begin to look like Moratha from Xenoblade 2. And it's like, yeah, this place doesn't go well when you go down that road.
Yeah, it's super cool to see all of that happen. Like, they do start going into what happened and like, yeah, humans bad.
True.
I don't know, it's pretty cool how they play all of that out. It's pretty neat.
And just as sort of Matthew and Nae'l are explaining that to Nae'l, and you might get through to her, of course, it's time for Alpha to show up. aka Big Bad Alvis here. Yep. Looking great, because we get our first proper look at like their model here, and just with like the wings of Zanza, like you said before, and it's just so immediately intimidating. The Zanza-esque music, the way sort of the world shapes around afterwards and becomes all blurry and like this yellow tinge. It's just intimidating. Like this is a way to do like a final boss for the series. it's tense.
Mm-hmm. Once again, it really sort of does well for the Xenoblade 1 fans, because it's very, very, very reminiscent of that final boss with Zanza. You know, where obviously Alpha has the wings and the background looks quite similar and that. But even still, like, it does come into its own as a very cool thing. Of course, Alvis just having the Monado, it's like, whoa, okay, what you do with that thing there, you know? Which way you swinging that thing, buddy? But, overall, it's just like a very cool fight. It's a very cool thing to finally see Alpha in the flesh, because this is the first time that most of the cast do, aside from Shulk and Rex. So
yeah,
it's a neat point where it's like, oh god, he's here.
Yeah, like, I don't mind this different take on Alvis, where like it is Alvis but heartless, and like all the delivery from the lines, it's like familiar but also in an eerie way, because it's kind of terrifying, especially when later on, of course. First of all, N shows up, which is badass to help you fight, that's just cool, getting to fight with N. But then Alpha turns into, like, their ultimate form, which is just some, you know, like, biblically accurate angel monstrosity. And it's... it's great, though. Like, it's very Xenoblade.
Oh, it's super cool, yeah.
Yeah. I think I've even heard people say it looks more like something from Xenosaga, that, like, not that I have the knowledge to back that up.
Oh, every Xenosaga fan says Xenoblade
that's
stuff
true.
is like taken from Xenosaga. That's nothing new. But to be fair, it is pretty crazy, and I'm not saying that they are wrong.
Yeah.
At all.
It's just
it's a very cool fight overall, and that boss, oh my god, it's just nuts, isn't it? That design.
Yeah, the music's going, everyone's fighting together with Nae'l there, and N fighting with you. It all just ramps up, and it's like, it can destroy you if you're not. It has like basically a one-hit kill move, you know, if you're not careful. So
yeah.
Of course, we're not going to gameplay here, but very tense fight. And once you beat it, then we just get the mega crazy Ouroboros. Everyone fuses together. It's crazy.
I mean, it's cool because I can't remember if it was you or Samm, but one of you mentioned, like, or maybe it was me, I don't know.
I don't think it was
me.
One
of us mentioned about how maybe at the end of Xenoblade 3 that they were going to all fuse into one big Ouroboros. And I think that was a theory a lot of people had, because it just kind of makes sense that they were going to do like a Power Rangers style.
Yeah.
Everyone fuses together when there's a fusion type thing in the game. So I was kind of surprised when it didn't happen. And then they did it here, and it's like, yeah, sure, fair enough. Cool. Like, you know, it's not a bad thing. It was somewhat expected to happen eventually, but
it's a good
that
way.
Doesn't make it any less cool.
Yeah, it's a good way to sort of do that whole. They haven't got like Ouroboros powers as we know it, but they're able to do something just to, you know, power friendship and whatever. But they're able to make some powerful attack happen regardless, and it's something we haven't seen in the main game. Yeah. And also, just I have to mention before where we see like the Pyra's, or I guess Numa's core crystal on Vandham's gloves. And look, if we were to discuss what that means and the significance of that, we would be here for another bloody hour, because no one's quite sure.
Yeah.
But the general idea I get, because they like linger on N's sword, and people think that might have to do with Logos. And the best I can gather is that N's sword and Matthew's gloves are made with Origin, we know, and Origin contains the memories of people, so maybe Matthew's Origin gloves contain, you know, Numa's memories, and the same for the Sword of the End containing Malice's or Logos's, perhaps. That's kind of the best I've got, but it's fascinating that this late in the game they set up something crazy like that doesn't really have exact payoff, that it doesn't explain itself at all. You're just like, yeah, speculate, nerds.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And I guess to add to that, I don't really know a lot about that side of things. I've not looked into those theories. But the one thing I would like to add is that Matthew's default arts are Agnian. They're the diamond ones. So,
yeah,
you know, possibly suggesting like he's oriented to that side of the world's. There's more to gather there, but we're not the ones to discuss all of that. I don't think we have the time to go into detail on it.
But it's fascinating, and I like. Even though it's kind of like, okay, what does that mean? I like that they set up these mysteries just for people to think about afterwards, even if we never get an answer. Like, it's neat. It's just cool seeing the crystal again. But you take down, you know, you take down Alpha, Matthew has his sort of final words with him where he's as nonchalant as ever. And then we get, I think we all knew it was probably coming, but Shulk and Rex and they all sacrificed themselves to keep Origin going without Alpha there. And even though like, I knew like they aren't there later on, we know something happens to them probably, it still got me. It's still sad seeing them have their last moments with their kids, and just that sort of where they're both at that level of maturity where they've just accepted it and they're ready to, you know, sacrifice themselves, but also they're optimistic that this isn't the end, we'll see you again. It's just so Xenoblade. It's the best way I can put it, really. Has to have that emotional.
It was very emotional.
Yeah.
And but I didn't feel sad during it at all though, and maybe it was because I was streaming it and that sort of thing happens. But I sort of was leaning much more towards that optimistic side, where I was like, well, we know in the main game that it ends up all working out. So like, there was that kind of side of me that was like, you know, I guess it's fine in that sense. But then it was also when they mentioned like, we're not, you know, they didn't die. Like they're just, you know, basically going dormant for a while to power Origin, and it's like, you know, they're not dying, they're not going to be permanently gone, and it's not super sad in my eyes. It's just like, you know, they're just having a little sleep for a while, and you know what, they deserve it. They did a good job. For me, it was a very feel-good moment, strangely enough.
Well, I think you're right, because ultimately this isn't Torna. This isn't some big tragedy that's going to leave you crying for a week afterwards, where... Because I almost thought it would be.
Yeah, that was miserable.
Yeah, because I was like, okay...
Yeah, I did cry at that.
Yeah, same. Because Shulk and Rex aren't there in the main... aren't sort of there in the main game, and we know that the Centomnia region isn't there in the main game, so I was like, are we going to get some Torna tragedy happen? But no, it's sort of like, it's solemn, but it's like a hopeful solemnness, like... So it's not...
Yes.
It's a little sad in that sense, but it's not like miserable. It's still like it's like a positive sadness in a weird sense, and I kind of like that. It's not just a Torna tragedy, but it's hopeful for the future. So I think they sort of did a good job with that. And then
and I think that sums up like the end of the trilogy very well as well. I feel like, you know, Torna is just sad, full stop. But this is like, you know, it's the end of the trilogy, and it's sad that's the case, but. You know, it also kind of feels good in a sense. It's like, you know, it's rounded out. It's nice. Yeah,
and then we get the answer to Origin crashing into Centomnia region, which is what happens to it, and that ends up down...
Crashing the Origin into Centomnia region.
How long have you been in the
Force?
Iconic. If only we got... Look, if the Curry Girl could get in here, the descendant of Colonel Vanguard should have been as well, I'm just saying. But,
I mean, no. Well, hey! Vanguard is there based on the Vandham line.
That's
like Matthew
true.
Is literally, maybe not specifically, but like, in essence, Matthew is Colonel Vanguard's heritage, and I am sticking that truthfully into my guns.
That's canon. Got it. But that does.
It is.
That sort of ends up why Origin is in the ocean in the main game, so that sort of ties all that together. And then we get some last sort of moment with Matthew talking with N. He sort of like says, alright, you can go from now, I'm going to punch you in the face again at some point, and you'll come round eventually. And it's sort of that nice sort of tease up to the main game, you know, where he says like, something will change, maybe it'll even be you, which, yeah, it is, because Noah and connections, it's nice. It's sort of...
It adds to the previous vibes, definitely.
Yeah, like we don't get, and I don't think they needed it, but I almost missed a little bit of like what Torna does, where like you see the ship sleeping and then it ends on Rex finding Pyra. Like I almost thought it would end in a similar way, and it doesn't quite. But I still like what they do with it in those little teasers there. And our last bit is Matthew Vandham's out of here. He's leaving on his adventure, which we heard about in the statues even. And they're just rebuilding a new city in the Cadencia region, like the main game. So it's sort of like a quite a simple ending, really, but sort of just tying things together and leaving a bit vague on what happens to Matthew in the end. But that's...
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense with what happens. And I like how, of course, all that stuff at the end is so much crazy stuff.
Yes.
You're going to be focusing on that and the trilogy as a whole. But I do like how it does just end the story with Matthew Vandham's out here, who is such a good protagonist. Like, of course, it's a short story, but he is so likable. Like, it's not your traditional protagonist for a lot of reasons, and he was just so good, like we talked about in the previous video. So I like how rather than going with the trilogy route, which is what they do in the credits, here they're like, no, let's focus on our main character for a second. It's pretty cool.
I agree, and just can I just have you saying out loud, Kai, that Matthew is really likable? Can you just say that? I just need that in official recording capacity, you know. Let it be known.
Matthew Vandham.
Oh, damn it!
Very likable.
Changing my name right now. I'm changing my surname. But but then, if you were waiting for that crazy end stuff, it's subtle, but we do see what appears to be the world splitting apart, like at the end of 3, but then them merging again. Our confirmation that they do merge, that Noah and Mio will find each other again, and then some light appearing, which people are freaking out of. It's cosmos, it's something, who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not. It's kind of nice getting that confirmation that, yeah, Mio and Noah meet again, the worlds fuse in some capacity, but also leaving it open. I like that we get that confirmation, but the real question is, what does... I guess we'll briefly touch upon this. We're getting sort of close to time here, but what does that mean for the end? Like, is that a tease for Xenoblade 4, or is that just like a... Again, another speculate on this nerds moment, like...
Yeah. People have obviously said it's a Cosmos reference.
Yeah.
So maybe it is just a reference, maybe it is an illusion, you know, maybe they're saying like, oh, you know, look out for a remake in the future of a certain beloved game. It could be anything like that, but honestly, it's the kind of thing where I almost don't want to think about it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I almost want to just let them do their thing for a while and come back to it. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, like we could do a whole lone discussion on this, and we've sort of done it in a little bit. Like, I don't think our thoughts have changed much since our last What's the Future of Xenoblade discussion. Like, I think this doesn't really change anything significantly.
Yes.
But like Xenoblade 4, like this, it could continue the story in the new world. Like because this is meant to be the wrapping up the Cloud saga, but with the worlds combining, you know, Cloud split them apart and they combine. That is the end of the Cloud saga. So Xenoblade 4, which I feel like is gonna happen because it's such a big name at this point, like it could be in that new world, but even if it is, I feel like it's gonna be vaguely connected. I don't think it's going to have like Noah and Mio showing up as the main characters. I don't think we're gonna get that level of connections, but to be honest, like you say, I kind of don't want to speculate at this moment. I trust Monolith Soft completely at this point, and I'm on board for the ride no matter what they do next. Like, if this is teasing something or if it isn't, I'm cool either way. I just want to play more Monolith Soft games, is really it. So,
yeah, it's just like they're doing such a good job, and like we said in that Future of Xenoblade video, I think Warriors has got to be next, man.
Yeah.
Like, surely that you know, there's potential for like another X game in the series. There is potential for another mainline. There's all of that. So it's just a matter of seeing what they choose and what they do.
yeah.
I would like to add is that in the credits were amazing with showing, like, they basically just recapped all 3 games.
Yes.
Through those cutscenes and everything, showing some of the artwork and bits, and like that was really cool. That was really heartfelt. Bringing back the old singer, obviously Joan Hogg, I believe her name was.
Yeah.
You know, very neat, because I only mention it because if not, someone like Carl would mention it in the comments. So yeah, obviously that was really cool. So overall, it just was a very nice end to the series, and
Yeah.
it's a nice feeling that although the series is over, like, very clearly there's gonna be something else cooking, but at the same time, this is a closed book.
Yes. It's definitely like, I mean, just to give like general final thoughts, I mean, Future Redeemed is great. It gets that higher level of fan service and connections to like the Cloud stuff that 3 didn't, which I don't think 3 needed. But like, I'm glad. I think they made the right decision by putting that here in Future Redeemed and making that what Future Redeemed is. But it also still stands on its own legs with, you know, like Matthew being a great protagonist, like arguably the best one even. Like, he's genuinely a contender. So they just really knocked it out of the park. And although like they definitely like they still leave some questions open, I don't think they wrap things up quite as neatly as I thought they might, in the sense of some stuff is still vague, but I don't think they needed to either. They just told a great story, and they finished the Cloud Saga in a way that, you know, it still leaves me thinking, this is one of the best series of video games ever released. It still is, and it ended in the great way to continue that, so, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Like, that's just all in all. Game good.
Game very good, yes. Couldn't have asked for much
story
better.
Good, I guess, for this specific video.
Yes, story. And yeah, that pretty much is it for our discussion and our Xenoblade Future Redeemed talk. So thank you so much, guys, for listening to all of this. Of course, you can stay tuned to BunchaJokahs because we're going to have more content coming out. We've got a regular monthly podcast. We'll probably be talking a bit on Tears of the Kingdom when we both finish that, but you know that's a long haul kind of game. So, and other discussions as well. Like I'm sure it's quite plausible we'll come back to Xenoblade at some point. You know, we're called BunchaJokahs for a reason. We're not going to drop the talk just because Future Redeemed is over. So
yeah, we sort of have to keep it going. It's our brand at this point. We don't have a choice.
Exactly. It's Sam's making us do it, but actually no, now he's making us do Mario Kart content, but it'll be back to Xenoblade at some point. But
yes.
But yeah, stay tuned to all of that here on BunchaJokahs on YouTube, or you can get audio-only versions on podcasting sites such as Spotify, so all under the name BunchaJokahs. Go check those out. And Kai, where else can people find you at?
They can find me on my... Well, I've got my YouTube. YouTube, Fascurreyn, it's linked and everything. Yeah, my full Future Redeemed experience, which I live streamed and got the highlights from, is all on that channel. So if you've, for some reason, watched all the way to the end of this and want to see my thoughts live, because I kind of expand upon them there, then that is all there, and my reactions to it all, and that's all there.
Yeah.
On Twitch, I'm also streaming as well. I'm just doing... Well, I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing yet, so I won't confirm any games, but... you know, I'm over on there too, and I'm always happy to kind of talk about it. So, yeah, that's about it from me.
Yeah, there'll be links to those in the description below, so do check those out. As well as a link to our friend Sam, who's our graphic designer who makes our logo, the thumbnails, and a bunch of shorts for us as well. So thank you once again, Sam. And that's
here's the best part.
Oh, yeah?
He's not even played Future Redeemed yet. He's on Chapter 5 of the main game. So if you have watched this far, comment, come on, Sam, hurry up.
Yeah, make
him do it.
Get it trending. Hashtag Sam finished bloody Xenoblade. But one day.
Do it.
One day. But yeah, until then, we will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.
Bye.